the Mississippian-era Cherokees. Anyone undertaking to set himself up as judge in the field of truth and knowledge is sure to be shipwrecked by the laughter of the gods. Albert Einstein. Pre-Columbian Indians not only developed advanced societies with ingenious technologies and beautiful works of art, but also shaped the land and left their mark on the very geography of North and South America. It was only the ravages of European disease and attendant decimation of Indian populations that created in the minds of the invaders a lasting impression of savagery and inconsequence, one perpetuated by scientific notions down to our day. It's as if an American Middle Ages never existed, as Barry Fell noted when he wrote that fragments of pottery have been made the basis of our interpretation of history. With the benefit of Constantine Rafinesque's outline of American Indian history, we can now take a closer look at some of the native nations inhabiting that chasm of the past, including the real people, or Cherokees. Rafinesque writes in the History of the Ancient Indians, something like a chronological order can be now introduced. The records of the Mexicans, the traditions of many Oghuzzian nations, Uyghur Turkic, for example, the Algonquins, Walam Olum, and the annals of the Europeans afford sufficient materials for a complete history. But I must be very brief. Nearly 2,000 years ago, 200 BCE, great revolutions happened in the north of Asia. The Oghuzzian Empire was severed, and a swarm of barbarous nations emigrated from Tartary, Mongolia, and Siberia, spread desolation from Europe to America. In Europe, they nearly destroyed the powerful Roman Empire, and in North America, they subverted many civilized states. Several of those Oghuzzian nations, driven by necessity or their foes to the northeast corner of Asia, came in sight of America and crossing Bering Strait on the ice. At various times, they reached North America. Two of them, the Lenape, Delaware, and Mengi, Iroquois tribes, seeking milder climates, spread themselves toward the south, while another, the Keritit, Eskimo, which came after them, spread on the seashores from Alaska to Greenland, and some others settled on the northwest coast of America, Haida Tlingit et al. These events correspond to the first period of the Algonquin people's history, as presented in the restored Walam Olum of David McCutcheon. There we read of a multitude 10,000 strong, crossing the frozen sea at low tide in the narrows of the icy ocean. 24 chiefs' reigns pass as they spread and settle in Turtle Island, North America, migrate to the Snake, Enemy River, present-day Washington and Oregon, where there are still at least two Algonquin-speaking tribes, the Yurok and Yates of California, that were apparently left behind, and make their way across the interior to emerge in the Mississippi River Valley, defeat the Taligans, and cohabitate with them on the Wabash River in Indiana. McCutcheon calculates this span of time as one of 500 years on the basis of 13 2/3 years per chief. If we take Rafinesque's starting point for the invasion to be around 200 BCE, this brings us to around 300 CE for the Algonquin army's progression to the eastern shore of the Mississippi. Here, the Algonquin armies conquer the Natchez, Istakans, and Taligans. Atlan's mixed with chronology compares well with Rafinesque's. A settlement was made east of the mountains, and the great Lenapean nation became thus divided into many distant tribes, independent of each other, but connected by a similarity of language, religion, manners, and acknowledged origin. A similar division took place in the Mengis, and the independent nations sprung from them, were the Hurons or Wyandots near Lake Huron, the Eries or Irigas on Lake Erie in Ohio, the Tuscaroras in Kentucky, the Senecas, Seneca, Mohawks, Iroquois, Cayugas, Oneidas on the St. Lawrence. That portion of the nation which remained west in the Mississippi, for example, Blackfoot and Cheyenne, two Algonquin-speaking Plains tribes, became mixed with some Otomian Sioux tribes and formed the great Dakota Nation, since divided into many tribes such as the Sioux, Assiniboines, Assiniboine, Tinton, Teton Sioux, Yanktons, Yankton Sioux. Here occurs one of the first explicit mentions of the Cherokee. They're presented as a third force in a power play between the Iroquois, Mengi, and Lenape, the core Algonquin nation, showing they had probably broken with their allies, the Iroquois, for the second time. A Lenape legend tells how the Iroquois stirred up a war against the Cherokee by killing a Cherokee child and leaving a Lenape war club on the scene as evidence. This tale may relate to those distant days. That the Iroquois, like the Cherokee, once lived on the other side of the Mississippi is apparent from several sources. One of these, a Tihanama Indian story, relates that the Iroquois encountered the Lakota Indians for the first time on the grassy prairies across the Mississippi. "Who are you?" the Iroquois asked them. The Lakota replied, "We are hunters of the buffalo. Who are you?" "We are hunters of men," said the Iroquois, and challenged the Lakota warriors to a contest on the spot. "You are not men," said the Iroquois, after winning the fight, "but women." They split the Lakota warriors' noses, the mark of an adulterous woman, and sent them on their way. "Tell your people to send men the next time," they said. The Cherokee, Cherokee, then crossed the Mississippi about the same time as the Algonquins and Iroquois, around 300 CE. All these tribes take up residence in the area along the Ohio vacated by the Teligans, Natchez, Istakans, and remaining eastern Siouan tribes, Otomi. In McCutcheon's version of the Wallam Olam, we read that before crossing the Mississippi, somewhere along the south bank of the Missouri, the Algonquins encounter a foreign tribe they called the Stonies under a chief named Strongstone. The latter is depicted with an angular headdress of 5 horns, unlike any other in the Red Record. Strong stone is an apt description of metal. The prominent headdress could represent a Greek hoplite's stallion crest. This style distinguished the Cherokee warrior and seems later to have been imitated by certain local plains tribes like the Pawnee and Punkas. Known as the porcupine roach, it is the prized part of Indian regalia. Hardly any leading man or fancy dancer at a powwow today would be without one. The millennium between 300 and 1300 CE witnesses the breaking off of the Iroquois to migrate onward to their historical locations, concentrated in upper New York State, along with the formation of the Shawnee dominions southward and the Lenape advance eastward. Sometime during this era, corresponding approximately to the Mississippian period of archaeologists, the Cherokee break for the second time with the Iroquois. The Cherokee migrates to the southern Appalachian Mountains in East Tennessee, where they wrest a new homeland for themselves from the assorted Muskogean, Yuchi, and Natchez tribes already inhabiting the area. As we have seen, evidence for ancient Greeks in America is sparse, but compelling. Traces of the Greeks may explain the migrations of the Cherokee through Mexico and are borne out by Quechua traditions. It is clear that after the Cherokees' exodus with the Huichols from Toltec, Mexico, they lived for several centuries in the Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri region, remembered in legend as the Land of Sorrows. Finds of a bronze Athenian medallion, along with 2 examples of a coin from the Athenian colony of Thurium on the Red River in Oklahoma, suggest one tarrying place where they stayed. Here they must have clashed with the Iroquois and adopted the Iroquoian language as a peace concession, for when the Algonquin army arrives around 300 CE, they join it as the Stonies, armored men. The 3 nations cross the Mississippi, defeat the Natchez and Teligans, and live together in a state fluctuating between friendly and hostile for 1,000 years, until the Shawnee begin to build up their hegemony over all tribes. The Cherokees, Iroquois, and Algonquins, including the Shawnee, did not build mounds. Only the Istakan Indians from Mexico raised these monuments. Principal among the Istakan, or Udo-Aztecan Indians, were the Natchez, who, as reported by Rafinesque, were forced out of the Ohio Valley by the incoming Algonquins and Iroquois, called by him Oguzians. By the time of recorded history under the Europeans, the domains of the Natchez receded within the surroundings of the city, named for them on the lower Mississippi. Only the Natchez trace and its continuation, the Avery, remained to show that their empire once stretched into Kentucky. It is documented fact that they built their last mound in 1712, shortly before being brutally slaughtered and dispersed by the French. In the late 1700s, the Indian agent Benjamin Hawkins took several Cherokee leaders to see the Etowah Mounds, situated just north of present-day Atlanta. They told him these were not the monuments of those who now held the land, the Creek, but the Indians who came before the Creek. We may identify these as Istakan tribes, like the Natchez. The Atlantic shores of America were not unknown to the ancient Greeks, nor were they unvisited by the Minoans, Egyptians, and Phoenicians before them. In Strabo's geography of about 25 BCE, America is called Epirus Occidentalis, the Western Continent. Writing in the 1st century CE, Plutarch describes the northern sailing route and records that the western continent lay 5,000 stadios beyond Greenland. He also mentions a southern route, beginning in the Canary Islands, followed of old by Phoenicians. This information seems to be based on the earlier writer, Diodorus Siculus, 1st century BCE. Plutarch writes also that Greeks founded a colony among the indigenous people across the Atlantic. A Greek tetradrachm found in Case County, Illinois, dating to between 175 and 164 BCE, seems to indicate that Hellenistic-era Greeks navigated up the Mississippi at that time. There is an abundance of other signs for Greeks in the Americas. As we have seen, archaeologists are just beginning to develop a chronology for the Mississippian period, conventionally set in the years 1200 to 1600. Occasionally, however, a random window opens up on these blank centuries. The Rocky Creek Stone is just such a testimony. It is, I propose, a record of the Cherokee conquest of their new territories in the Cumberland and separation from the Shawnee. The 19 by 15-inch engraved limestone tablet was exhumed in 1870 in a Mississippian period mound on Rocky Creek near Castalian Springs, Sumner County, Tennessee. It is now in the possession of the Tennessee Historical Society and is periodically on exhibit at the Tennessee State Museum in Nashville. Engravings were published and partially elucidated in 1890 by Gates P. Thruston in his Antiquities of Tennessee. I will go further than Thruston and say that the Rocky Creek tablet evidently commemorates a peace treaty, concluding a war between the newly arrived Cherokee and the Shawnee, whose stronghold by then was in Middle Tennessee. The tablet shows us a Cherokee with a war club, far left, identified by his distinctive top knot, 4 scarification marks across his face, the traditional sign of a chief, and sun symbols on his skirt. The Cherokee were so proud of their top knots that a silver cylinder to hold them in place was one of the most popular trade items bartered to them by English traders out of Charleston in the 1600s and 1700s. He battles a Shawnee warrior, distinguished by mohawk hairdo, feathers, spear, and large square shield with sky serpent design. The Cherokee side evidently carries the day. The Shawnee sue for peace. The 2 tribes smoke the peace calumet in a longhouse of the Shawnee, hung with checkered wampum belts, bottom center. The 2 chiefs are reprised on the right of the tablet, dressed now in ceremonial attire. The Cherokee wearing a horsehair-crested helmet and carrying the spear and shield of a Greek hoplite. The Shawnee clasping hands in a wedding ceremony with his Cherokee bride bearing wampum belts as a pledge of peace. She has her hair in a bun, the sign of maidenhood, and wears a Middle Eastern-style plaid kilt, displaying a large 6-pointed star on her breast. The groom has brought the requisite blanket and bag of meat to exchange. Thanks to the union of the 2, the Cherokee and Shawnee people are now on the path of peace, symbolized by the horizontal lines beneath them rather than warpath. The Cherokee chief has a gorget about his neck in the shape of a crescent moon, below it a sun, and there are sun signs also on his skirt and shield. A similar configuration of quarter moon and sun was depicted on the posts of the Cherokee council house, the Katias. The early Cherokee, like the ancient Greeks, Egyptians, and Libyans, were sun worshippers, calling themselves a great nation known as the Cherokee of the half-sphere Temple of Light, Vision of Elo. The Shawnee man, on the other hand, is identified by a double serpent design on his shield. Above him and going through his head is a longhouse or village with a serpent and other clan symbols over it, encoding, doubtless, its name, perhaps Turtletown. These pictograms resemble those of the Walam Olam, while the Cherokee writing system, on the other hand, appears to be Ogam, a Mediterranean script. The 6-pointed star adorning the Cherokee woman seems to me clearly to be a Star of David, emblem of Judaism. In my experience, no like it can be adduced from Indians of this time period. She wears a skirt of woven cloth and bracelets, with exotic touches. Of the skirt's pattern, it may be pointed out that Thruston found numerous instances in the same area of what he calls the familiar Greek key or classic fret pattern. Citing his predecessor Conant, he also notes that human figures from nearby excavations are shown clad in flowing garments gathered by a belt around the waist and reaching to the knees, a perfect picture of the tunics and chitons of ancient Greeks. Cave murals discovered in 1883 by the archaeologist Priest in Ohio tell the same story. Their locations now unknown, they depicted Indians with Greco-Roman toga-like costumes. Further, an Egyptian-style mummy with Greek writing on the wrappings was entombed on the Cumberland River near Carthage, Tennessee in 1815, not far from Castalian Springs. As described by the antiquarian Hayward, it was a young woman with blonde hair wearing a silver clasp on her wrist. The old-time Cherokee unshamedly glorified their bodies. Their athletic orientation can be explained by the original Spartan and Dorian Greek caste of their society. David Sansone, in his study of athletics in the ancient world, notes a correlation between Cherokees and Greeks in this respect, without suggesting any real historical link. He points to numerous and striking parallels between the practice of the Greeks in connection with athletics and that of the Indian ballplayers, although he remarks that there is no question of direct contact between the two, ascribing the coincidences to a common origin in the magical practices of prehistoric hunter societies. Sansone explores repeated correspondences between the Greek rituals surrounding the Olympic Games and Cherokee athletes' preparation for ballplay, a form of lacrosse. They extend to prohibitions against specific foods, a taboo against intercourse with women for a period of 1 month before and 7 days following an event, disqualification if the athlete's wife is pregnant, bathing before and after in a nearby river, and a fire ritual. Both Cherokee and Greek athletes scraped their skin before the pregame bath. The Cherokee scored it with an implement designed to produce parallel superficial gashes just before a ballgame. Greek athletes used a toothed sickle, replaced later by a smooth-edged strigil, to scrape and scarify their muscles. Cherokee men submitted to having a comb with teeth of turkey spurs or some other sharp object, canuga, scratcher, compare Greek kanon, dragged across their bodies before plunging 7 times in a stream. The scoring of skin was supposed to strengthen athletes and help them win. The sickle, or strigil, with which we may compare the Cherokee turkey bone comb, says Sansone, opened the surface of the skin to allow the purifying waters of the bath to soak in and any weakness or illness to escape. The function of the strigil was analogous to that of the turkey bone instrument used in the Cherokee scratching ordeal. The pain thus caused was considered an act of sacrifice. Archaeologists have noted the distribution of so-called chunky stones from 600 CE in a southward pattern. Their spread exactly fits the time and direction of the Cherokees' travels before they settled in the southern Appalachians. The prized heirlooms from the root dlan, meaning swoop down fall, were housed in Indian temples and clan houses, and they seem to be the same as the Greek diskos, thing to pitch. The discus throw was one of the 5 sporting events along with the javelin in the Greek pentathlon, the main contest of the Olympic Games. Indian chunkies come in many sizes, but are usually round, flat, polished stones, about 12 inches in diameter. They were used in a contest between 2 men on a sandy playing field. Bets were wagered by the spectators. One player hurled the stone so that it rolled as far as possible in a direct line, while the other ran forward a few yards to a line and threw a javelin at the traveling chunky. The first player then threw his javelin. Whichever came closest to the chunky when it came to rest determined the winner. Chunky stones were often of venerable antiquity and were owned by the religious hierarchy of the town, not individuals. Like the Greek discobolus depicted in a familiar ancient Greek statue by Myron, Cherokee athletes competed in the nude, or at least barebutt for breech clout. Curiously, it was a tradition recorded by the first pioneers in Abingdon, Virginia, that the Indians used to have intertribal sporting events at Blackmore's Fort every 4 years. The custom was discontinued shortly after the English arrived. Finally, let us consider the figure of Stoneclad, or Stonecoat. This culture hero must come from the Cherokees' Stony tribe past. He is a fierce warlock, responsible for bestowing on the Cherokees specific medicinal formulas and knowledge. Hunting songs, the crystals ulungstata, Greek ulungtata, judged healthy, used for divining, and the red clay used for face and body painting. His whole body is covered with a skin of solid rock. He is a flesh-eating warrior with a long, sharp instrument he uses for killing people, and he is called an askili or chaskili, which, a name for one of the types of Cherokee spiritual practitioners, which can also mean owl. I suggest chaskili or chaskiri in the lower Cherokee dialect, with its telltale foreign TS sound, comes from Greek. It appears to be a corruption of the Greek word for Thracian. When Stoneclad dies, he is given a funeral pyre. He sings forth all of his magical charms and storied knowledge for everyone to hear, and bequeaths to the 7 clans a firm foundation for the Cherokee Nation. Ever afterward, it is taboo for any Cherokee to add to the stories and songs of old, Tikano, to come to pass. According to musicologists, the Cherokee greatly favored anhematonic scales. One of these 5 or 6 note scales is built into every southeastern Indian flute made today. It can be simulated by playing all the black notes on a piano keyboard. One hears it in the harmonies of many country music songs, an industry that originated in the Cherokees' former homeland of Tennessee. The harsh but harmonic Dorian mode of country music pickers and southeastern flute underlies much of American Indian music, particularly that of Hopi, Zuni, Pima, and Cherokee. To get an idea how it sounds, think of the song "What Shall We Do with a Drunken Sailor?" The Beatles' Eleanor Rigby, or The Doors' Light My Fire. Most of the Doors songs, in fact, are in the Dorian mode. Cherokee stomp dance songs have melodies in the slow sections that are anhematonic. The closest analogs in Native America appear to be Hopi, Zuni, and Pima music. Cherokee music is also noteworthy in featuring water drums and leg rattles, instruments with a deep history in Egypt.